right. So today we're going to be talking about Prism. First, I'll do a quick round of introductions, just a quick overview of Prism, its functionality, and kind of its purpose, and then I will hand over for a demonstration. And during that demonstration, feel free to ask any questions. I'll be fielding them as they come in and interrupting or interjecting where we can to make sure things get answered. So today's goals is to go over a bit about Prism, its new functionality, but for those of you that have never seen it or heard of it before, to introduce you to its capabilities. So first, my name is Justin Forte. I'm the product growth manager and the moderator for today for Stoplight. We also have Phil Sturgeon joining us, who's the chief architect at Stoplight.
Hello.
Hi, Phil. All right, so here we are with Prism. So let's start off with what's generally our goals when we're developing, and then we'll get into a little bit about Prism. But generally, we prefer to iterate early and iterate often as part of the development process. It helps us basically be more accurate when we release our code and our products. I usually say it's a goal because the reality is usually a bit more of we're getting feedback late, we're iterating late or after the fact, little typo there. So the reality is that we're usually waiting for feedback from our end users or from our customers. We're getting that feedback way too late in the process that we actually have to then go way far back to the beginning and then make adjustments where that time could have been saved in terms of iteration. So overall, iteration during the development process instead of waiting until the end is the preferred path, and that's the goal, basically. And that's where Prism comes into play. And Prism is, just a quick overview of what it does, is a mock server transformation layer, it's a validation layer, contract testing tool, and logging tool for all or subsets of traffic. So I'll talk about a little bit about what's new, and so I don't steal any thunder or anything. I'm going to hand over to Phil, and he'll jump into what it does into more details. So in this iteration, so our latest release, we have support for OpenAPI 3.0, in addition to our previous support for OpenAPI Spec 2.0. It's fully open sourced, so we already got quite a few community contributions, which is wonderful. So feel free to check us out on GitHub. We have more dynamic example responses. We have much greater detailed logging, including for failed requests as well. And we have an increase in request volume for the mock APIs that are generated. All right, Phil. It's time to hand over to you and to go through a bit over Prism overview and then into the new features and then anything else you want to share about what Prism can do for everybody.
All right. Look at that seamless handover. It's like we rehearsed this.
Before you jump in real quick, just as things go, like I said, I will be moderating kind of the questions and answers, so feel free to ask as they come in. And I will help interject, Phil, and answer those questions for you.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, Prism, it's been around for a while. We had version 2 that was closed source, and that was written in Go. So some people might have used it, but you might not have seen much of the source code or know too much about it. And some folks are getting excited now purely because it's open source. So I'm going to give you a little demo of how this whole thing works. Clear the screens out. Right, so it's a command line tool, just like Spectral. It's got, yeah, you can install it with Yarn or NPM, or you can install it with Docker, or you can install binaries. We've made it super easy for anybody to be able to use this as Windows binaries and Linux as well. So once you've got it installed and in your path and somewhere useful, you just want to pass it a YAML file. Once again, we're using the pet store example. And this is something that's new. We now kind of show you exactly what paths you can expect. So in the pet store, it's all about pets, funnily enough, and stores. So once you kind of grab one of these URLs, you can start doing stuff with it. You could load it up in the browser, but the browser is going to request HTML or XML or something like that, which isn't really what we have in our API. So instead, you can use Curl. Yay! I prefer to use HTTP, I guess is how you pronounce it. My accent makes that tricky, but the command is just HTTP. And so you can do this and get a little pretty version. So what you'll notice is this is the structure of our data. If we were to look at documentation, this will look very similar to the example that it will generate. And that essentially is exactly what a mock server is. Anytime you have an example of some JSON that may appear in your HTML docs that you're hosting somewhere, imagine that the server is just kind of sourcing those examples to the user via the URL. So a very simple example might look like this. It's not the most useful data in the world because, you know, there's an ID number and we don't know what the ID number should be, right? So it's just 0. And you can make this information a lot better. But the point is that Prism will always show something fairly useful, and then it will get more and more useful the more data that you give it. So for example, it's just showing string because it doesn't know what sort of output it should really actually be. So we can make this a lot better by looking at the pet definition here. You can see some of these similar property names. We've got ID, category, name, photo, URL. So for category ID, if it wasn't actually, would be a good one. Instead of this, we can add example. Cannot type. Example 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh man. Example 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, yes, we do need to add live reload to Prism. That is a feature I'd love to see coming soon, but for now you restart the server and you will see ID 1, 2, 3, 4, which is a little bit more useful than 0, right? So whilst you're creating your OpenAPI specs, just be aware that the more examples or default values that you can put in, the more you can put into this data source, the more useful it will be coming back. But so this is what is this? This is a collection of 1 pets, and it also does resources. So you'll notice over here, we've got pets, pet ID, right? Well, that accepts any whatever number, as long as it is valid for the parameter type. And we will see Felis, the fluffy. It uses Faker to generate some of these names, so sometimes they're a little funny. Now, what do we got here? We can look at different examples. So named examples in OpenAPI 3 are available through the example query string. So we can just use whatever content comes out by default, but we can also pick specific examples. So we can say, give me the dog and give me the cat. Right? These are 2 defined examples that we can go look at in a second. But if you try and talk about turtles, which are obviously superior, sadly, there's no example named turtles, so you get an error. Errors from Prism, when they're actually from Prism itself and not from your specification, will always be using the RFC API problems, and they'll always have a fairly obvious type saying like, this is literally coming from Prism, so don't try and code your application against this error, right? If you do that, you'll have a bad time when you switch over to the production application and all of a sudden there isn't a types from Stoplight anymore. But if you're curious about named examples, this is something that not everybody in OpenAPI land is familiar with. Pets. So there's different types of examples you can have. Oh, yeah, it's pets /1, 2, 3, isn't it? Ooh, here we go. So you have your schema, and different properties inside the schema can have examples, and we'll use those when we're generating the kind of the default view. But if you select a named example, it will override that default view and just use this instead. So instead of us having to construct what we think is a useful mock, you are saying like, I would prefer this one, please. And so you get the cat instance, or you get the dog instance, right? And that's that for getting stuff. It's pretty simple. There's another cool little trick you can do actually, which is as for dynamic ones. So if you were to use, if you just keep on making the same get request is static information. I lied earlier when we said we use Faker for this. This is just static. It's exactly the same. But you can use dynamic equals true, and you'll get Faker generated stuff. So this is all completely different every time. This can be useful for making sure that your application is ready for all sorts of different information that might come back. What will happen if photos URL is empty? What will happen, if there's 10 tags or whatever? You can use this to kind of change things around. Another option as well is you can pass dynamic when you start up the server, and it will always mean that any request is dynamic unless you specifically pass in dynamic false. So you have a few different options for whether you want static or dynamic. And if you're going with static, then you have a few different options as in which example would I like to pick. But let's quickly have a look at something more than just get, because APIs aren't just about getting things. There's also post, which is a little bit different. So here, this syntax might look a little funny. It's just how HTTP does it. And what we're saying is we're going to be sending JSON. This saves us having to write header content type is JSON. And it will send the post. And we're talking to the pets collection. And we're going to create the turtle pet because that's obviously the best pet. Now, Prism has helpfully told us that the request we just made is trash. Oh, what is this? Question. Cannot see bottom of screen. Damn. I don't know about that. Maybe I could make my font bigger. Could somebody else paste in chat if this looks okay, or what do I do? Can see bottom of screen. Screen says 100%.
We're looking good.
Okay, good. Panic. So yeah, this is a feature we call request validation, right? So instead of just getting stuff and you getting some JSON back, which isn't wildly helpful, you can actually start to build your client applications to work against Prism. This is, as we mentioned already, when clients want to start developing stuff as soon as possible, right? So they can start giving you feedback on how things work. And if you just build the entire thing and then dump it on their lap and just cross your fingers and hope everything's okay, then you're going to have a really bad time. So if you can just pass somebody this mock instance and just say, like, just go run Prism, they can start playing around with integrating and hopefully give you some feedback before you've spent a month writing a whole bunch of really complicated code. You can just tweak the YAML and make it better. So one of the things that Prism does to help with that is that it will give you validation based on your actual API specifications or description documents. So another benefit, if you use your API description documents for validation in your source code, then the mock and the actual production code will be perfectly in line because it's the same validation logic running, right? But it's probably a topic for another day. What this is doing is it's complaining that we have not got the required property photo URLs. So we can go look at our spec to see why that is. And here we go. So pet requires photo URLs. Photo URLs is an array of strings. It's not wildly detailed. It could be a bit more informative if it was to have format URL, for example. But that'll do us. And the way that you do that in HTTP is you chuck this magical syntax on the end. So we're going to send up a photograph of our turtle, and then everything works. I would love, whilst I was putting this demo together, I was thinking how much I'd love to have a feature which basically looks for matching parameter names in the response body to the request body, right? So it would say name is Stoford and photo URLs would have the actual photo URLs. But the idea with the mock server isn't that you have a real actual API that actually stores values and sends them around all over the place. The most basic level is like, when I send this data, is it the right format? Is the string too long? Should it be an array instead? Should this be a numeric string? And basic kind of type integrations like that. It doesn't really get into like copying and emulating your business logic or anything else. So there could be a feature coming up which kind of helps some basic parameter name matching, but there's always going to be some other stuff going on. That is pretty much how posting stuff works. But I want to show off this a little bit, what's happening in the CLI here. This is a really handy, we call it enhanced logging. And the idea is that because the decision-making process for what Prism shows you when is quite complicated, I know a lot of people that have tried to make their own mock servers and think it's really simple. They think you just kind of put some JSON on a URL that responds and it takes 5 minutes, but there's a lot of decision-making to be done when it comes to content negotiation, using accept and content type headers and all that sort of stuff. So pretty much every decision that Prism makes in figuring out what example it should respond with, it will tell you about in the CLI. So it will let you know whether it passed the validation rules or not. It will let you know what the accept header was and basically say if it was unacceptable. It will let you know what type of status code you're trying to return. And you can actually request different status types, something I should have showed earlier. If we do HTTP get. So we're trying to get a pet, but we would like to see, let's do this. We're trying to request a pet, but we want to know what happens if it goes wrong. We can do code equals 404. And then this will give us an example of our 404 page. Now, I think the reason this is an empty response is because in the pet store, it didn't actually define a response for pets. So yeah, if we were to put in here, you then give it a schema. If you do all of that, then it will return the actual schema. If you try to return some nonsense, oh, interesting. Oh yeah, so this is a feature. So there's also the default. Where is it? If you have find by tags, I'm just scrolling like a mad person at this point. But if you have a default response like this, then any type of error that you request, it will use that as a basis for it. But if you were to like define the status code, then it will use that, whatever it is. And if you request one and it doesn't know how to do it, then it will just error and say like, I don't know how to do this. So Prism is super advanced in all of the very many things it can do. And we made a decision flow diagram to help with this. I'm going to quickly pull that up. The decision flow diagram, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it looks a bit like this. So it will check to see if the root exists. Is the request valid? Is the status request valid? Does a response code exist for this? Should we use the default response? There's so much stuff that it has to figure out, and it goes into this little sub loop for when you request other things. It's a really useful tool, and I'm sure that has generated a fair few questions. So I'm going to hand it over.
All right, so I'm going to open it up a little bit. We answered a few of our questions coming in. Jason pointed out earlier that he noticed the example 1, 2, 3, 4 was mapped to the integer 1, 2, 3, 4 to meet the description. It was very nice. Feel free, anybody, to kind of open up with questions in the Q&A section below and everything. Phil, as part of the process, kind of like we talked about earlier with kind of iterating often and earlier in the part of the process, can you go through any of your personal experiences where, for example, past experience where something like this wasn't available or you didn't have it and it was really difficult, and then in comparison to maybe an experience where, being able to kind of iterate and test early really helped you out?
Yeah, absolutely. In my previous role, there was like 50 APIs going around, and new APIs were being created and destroyed all the time. And the very first thing that anyone would do during the development or even the design planning phase, that no one would even sit down with a whiteboard and sketch up like a list of endpoints or a list of resources or anything like that. Like the first thing they do is type Rails new and then start coding. And what this generally led to, it led to the proliferation of global versioning in a really uncontrollable way. Not even global versioning, just like awkward resource level versioning. Because what would happen is this new API would be created with the idea of like 3 or 4 different clients using it, but they would only want to roll it out to one client first, because obviously different teams have different different availabilities and stuff. So you'd have client A, which is an iPhone application. They would sit down with, once the entire prototype had been developed, right? Version 1 is handed across to the iOS team, and they're like, "Here, we made it. What do you think?" And then the client team would kind of give them all their feedback, and they'd be like, "Hey, we need, this resource needs to be merged into here. We need a link to this. We need to add pagination, or the way that you've handled pagination isn't quite going to work." Whatever the feedback is, that all happens with client 1 being the main feedback giver. So what ends up happening is version 1 isn't this wonderful generic version of the API that would work for anybody. You've got the iOS API that's tailored to the needs of iOS, right? And so by the time that somebody else, another client, comes along, maybe they were meant to be working on implementing the API around about the same time, but they were busy for a week or two. Version 1 is already in production now. The API is already live. Version 1 can't change because the iOS team are using it. But this second team doesn't have the ability to actually integrate with the API because there's a few other changes that they need. And so what do you do then? Well, you've got version 1, I guess we'll have to make version 2. And then the third client comes on, you've got version 3, and the fourth client comes on, you've got version 4. And this would always happen because no one ever sourced feedback at any point. And now you have to maintain 4 different versions of the code base. You can't get rid of version 1 without client 1 redoing all of their work. And when client 1 gave you your feedback in the first place, you had to do a bunch of rewriting code to make it work. So everyone's just rewriting code all the time and maintaining stuff all the time. N+1 client problems. Like the more clients you get, the more versions of your API you have, and the more times people need to rewrite everything. It's terrible.
Sorry, I had to unmute real quick. So thank you for sharing that. And we do have a few questions to go through. And then a couple that were asked actually in chat. I'm asking them to bring it over to the Q&A section. So let's start off with Paul asked, will there be a GUI for this, basically a GUI?
Yes. So Stoplight will be using this as the guts for a whole bunch of really awesome functionality. If any of you are on the Spectral webinar, it's a very similar answer to that, which is, the open source kind of CLI stuff. It is a bit more generic, but then we use this to power how Stoplight does things. So there's the CLI, there's the JavaScript API you can use as well. There's no interface that's going to be built directly into the open source thing. At least it's not planned, mostly because it's just kind of an awkward way of doing things. Prism runs entirely from your spec. So you can use visual designers like Stoplight Designer. You can use those to kind of add the examples and to add everything else. And then Prism just runs from the spec, from what you've got.
Great, thank you. And now Jason asked, how does it go following the reference files to external files?
Oh, yeah, it just follows them. If you have a ref to a local file or to a URL, it'll just resolve that, and then it works.
Cool. All right. And then why did the turtle post call return a dog object?
Like I said, there's no database in the background tracking things, and there's no wiring of like, this is a request item and it lines up with the response item. So the reason the dog example showed up was because that's the default example, just the same as when you do get pets 1, 2, 3. It will look at the components /schemas /pet, and then it will construct a generic default. Like I said, I would love to talk to some interested users about how you would like this functionality to work, because while it seems really simple to be like, oh, the name field is the name field, right? Requests and responses don't always line up exactly. Sometimes people will have like a data wrapper on the get, but they don't have any sort of wrapper or envelope on the post. So things might be nested differently, and there could be multiple name properties. So you have to track category.name differently to whatever .name. There's a lot of different things that can go on. So yeah, that feature needs more planning, and it's definitely something I'd like to look into, but it's not particularly simple.
I do want to kind of jump to a question that was asked in chat. I know he didn't ask it in the Q&A section, but I want to make sure it gets answered. But uh, it's more of an example. Could you please show how the XFaker property works?
Yes, I made a note to do that and I didn't. So there is a common convention in OpenAPI land. X hyphen is, the vendor extension, and then this Faker is the name of the extension. So we enabled the Faker extension. If I go to components around here somewhere, pet, I know where it is, 900. It's the trouble with having this one massive file. This is not how people should make files. You should always use ref and make it small and easy to navigate. Here we go. So this is literally all you do. There's different things you can do. You can have like internet.ip and whatever. There's loads of things, and I'll show you where they are in a sec. We have to reload because we changed it. Wait a minute. Example doggy xfake. Oh, it's because I didn't use dynamic. That's my fault. If you want Faker, it's on the dynamic option. And there you go. Boyd Hag is now the name of our dog. And it will come up with a different name every single time. So dynamic mode, basically, if left completely alone and given nothing to work on apart from the type, will just shove random stuff in there. It will basically lorem ipsum you with random stuff. But if you give it more to work on, if you give it if you give it the X-Faker, then it will try and generate something from that. If you use format as well, it will use the format to hopefully make your example a little bit more relevant. So the more information you put in your API descriptions, the better the static and/or dynamic generated ones are. The tool we use under the hood is JSON Schema Faker. And yes, there's a bit of confusion about OpenAPI and JSON Schema not being exactly compatible, but we've managed to kind of avoid that problem for you. And we still use this as the guts. So just have a look through this to see what types of formats you can use. There's a whole bunch, and I forget exactly where they are, but they're around somewhere. There we go. Probably in usage. Support keywords. No, I don't know. It's in the doc somewhere.
Awesome, thank you. Sorry, I was also looking at chat as well. I can answer this one real quick. How will the recording of this call be available afterwards? We will put it in a YouTube upload, and we'll link it in our webinar sections in the next day or two. So can these new features also be used for OAS 2?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It works with OAS 2 and OAS 3 exactly the same.
Great. And then Simon asks, if I can read it correctly, how does Prism integrate with Stoplight UI? And can you show a workflow for an API designed in the UI?
Not easily. So Prism v3 is designed to work with some of the newer stuff, which is yet to be released. But basically, because it just works with OpenAPI files, you can pass in a URL to the OpenAPI file. So you can just point it to the URL on the Stoplight site. But a lot of the newer stuff that we're building is going to be just working with local YAML files. So it will be super easy to work with because you're just running Prism against the local files that you have. I guess the workflow would be to like clone it down from your GitLab instance and then run it via the CLI, which I know isn't ideal, but things will be more clear in time with the new releases coming out soon.
All right, and then also added in that section as well, for the same person, similar grouping of questions. would they just download the JSON of the API and use it with Prism, or is there any other integration?
Yeah, for the CLI tool, it works with URLs, so you can either point it straight at Stoplight. There's like an export option that gives you a URL, and you can point it at that URL. Or yes, you can download the JSON and point it at your JSON. There's no built-in like login to Stoplight via the Prism CLI option, because it's just not necessary. You can just download the JSON or point it at the URL.
Great. Jason asked as well, he hasn't used this yet, can't wait, but does the API description need to be realized, or will the tool pull in separate file and URL schemas as needed?
It doesn't need to be resolved. No, it will pull in, if you have a ref to whatever, it will pull in things from the ref. So.
Paul also asked, would also like to see contract testing in action. Is writing to similar to how it is done in V2?
That's a very good question. So contract testing is going to be coming in a minor version for Prism V3. It's a little tricky. We didn't manage to get contract testing into the 3.0 launch just because it's a fairly big feature and we wanted to get it right, but we also didn't want to delay release indefinitely. Prism V2 did a lot of stuff. It did many things, and that actually, for a lot of people that understand how Prism V2 worked, they loved all those things, but it was very difficult for new users to wrap their head around what Prism V2 actually did. I initially, as a user before I joined Stoplight, was very confused by Prism. I was like, I know this can do loads of stuff, but what do I do with it? Like having an entire toolbox thrown at your feet instead of a simple manual for how to do something. So we ended up bumping contract testing back. It will hopefully be in 3.1, and if not, it'll be in 3.2, and it will be a little bit different. Instead of you needing to construct scenarios and do this extra work through the interface, it will basically be very similar to the request validation, in which it will just shout at you if you make bad requests. We're going to add a Prism proxy command, which will basically be a proxy to a real server, and you can make requests to the proxy, and then it will do validation on that with two modes. One will be like logging, and the other one will be error really hard. So if you use the logging thing, it will say like, hey, this request had some nonsense in it, or it will say, hey, this response had some like different stuff to what the spec said. So you can use this for monitoring your staging. And then there'll be like fail hard mode, which will be really useful for development. So you run your API localhost on your computer, and you are developing your iOS app, and you're doing make your routing traffic through Prism, and then it will basically error really hard if there's a discrepancy between the two things. So I feel like contract testing will be much easier to work with in Prism V3 when we get a chance to add it, but it won't be exactly the same as it was in V2.
All right, thank you. Will there be a version of Prism for ARM processors?
Yes, hopefully. We build for, how do we build things? I can't remember the exact tool we use for building, but I think it's PKG. We build for Windows and Linux and OS X, and yeah, I'm sure we do.
And so Alec asked, can I have some kind of infrastructure in the dynamic responses, something like Thinker?
Some sort of infrastructure?
Some kind of structure. I may have said infrastructure. Sorry, I was speaking fast. So can I have some kind of structure in the dynamic responses?
I don't entirely understand the question.
Okay, all right. Alec, if you can jump in on your question a little bit and maybe give a little bit more detail, that'd be great. While you're doing that, we'll move on to a few other questions. So Suvik asked the question again. Actually, I apologize. Can you go over kind of the UI for Prism again, where it lives inside Stoplight, et cetera, and we'll just kind of go from there.
So this version of Prism doesn't correlate exactly to anything. There's no UI for it inside Stoplight. This webinar is kind of trying to show how Prism works in isolation as a CLI tool. There will be integration with this version of Prism baked into upcoming products, but seeing as they're not quite ready to show yet, I can't show those. They will be ready really soon though. I'm sad I can't demo them, but give it like a week or two and you'll see cool things.
So overall, there will be a UI available, but we will demo that when it comes in soon.
Yeah, just like in the current version of products, the one that we've called Next. The current version of products, like you work on the designer, you have the visual designer and you have the text-based designer, and there's a little kind of mock server tab you can click and it will give you information on how to make calls to those. Exactly the same. You'll be working with an editor and you can just make requests to the mock server without needing to run it in the CLI. It will just already be running for you in the background. So the integration is lovely and it's similar to what you're used to if you use the current products.
Okay, great. Then we got to thank you for that as well. So what is planned for data persistence, so allowing Prism to act like a sandbox?
Yeah, sandboxing is something I definitely want in upcoming versions. We aren't there yet. The order of mocking that we kind of focused on was, step 1, static mocking. Step 2, dynamic mocking with a bit of faker. Step 3 will be customized mocking, and customized mocking is using middlewares to add programmatical code. Like you can write JavaScript and you can slide it in the request stack of middlewares or the response stack of middlewares, and maybe both. And that will allow a whole bunch more power. You can write just custom logic and you can do things like the Stripe API, for example. If you use a credit card that the number is 44444444, it will fail. If you use some other number, it will pass. If you use some other number, it will flag as fraud, right? That will stop you needing to request specific examples. You can just send it specific data. That might be an example of one sort of middleware that somebody would like to write. We'll then piggyback on top of that to add sandboxing sometime. I really can't make any promises as to like which quarter or when that might be, but I want to see middlewares sooner rather than later, and people can write their own sandbox logic at that point. It's definitely on the roadmap, and come chat to me on GitHub about that. There's a few issues for these sort of kind of further down the line features on there.
All right, thank you. And then how can I add key clock in the API auth?
What was the first word? Key something?
Key lock? Is it key lock? Maybe it's a typo.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah.
I think the question's about like security authorizations. Yeah, so we're actually right now working on a feature that will be part of 3.1, which will add security validation and key cloak. I don't know what that is, I'm afraid, Paul. Come talk to me on GitHub, make an issue about key cloak and we can talk about it. There's a bunch, we're working on a feature right now for security validation, which will basically say, for example, if this endpoint is secured via X-API key, API key header exists and you didn't send one, so boo 401, this is rejected. Obviously that won't be able to help with the key you sent is invalid because we don't have a list of valid keys or anything like that, but it will get people thinking about the fact that they need to start integrating OAuth 2 support into their code while they're integrating. So we will have security validation in 3.1, and the release date tentatively is end of August for 3.1. So we're trying to keep the cadence pretty good for new features coming out on this.
All right, thank you. And then let me answer that one real quick. Oops. Oh, I accidentally dismissed one. 1 second, let me go find it again.
Rejected.
Exactly, no. So does the version 3 of Prism still work with before and after scenarios, or does it support similar to the V1 before and after script to modify request response body codes?
Yeah, so those will be the before and after in scenarios like that. That's what the custom middlewares will be. It might sound a little funny that we've kind of removed some features, but we had to really slim down Prism and focus on being the best kind of CLI based mocking tool that we could be, and trim away some of the other features that were less core to that goal. But things like custom middleware will be coming back. So those will be essentially before and after is a request middleware and a response middleware. And yeah, seeing as this uses Fastify, it should be quite simple to add custom middlewares if you're using the JavaScript API. You just have to figure out how to enable that through the CLI as well. I really want this feature to come soon though.
Perfect. All right, we are closing up with questions right now. So we're about 45 minutes in, which is pretty good. We do want to start keeping these within 30 minutes presentation, and then we'll leave the rest for Q&A. So we're right on schedule. But if there's any other questions, I'll give another 60 seconds or so for people to kind of jump in and ask. Otherwise, I'll start kind of the process of closing things up. So as a reminder, we will be putting this up on our webinars page over the next few days. So we'll upload it to YouTube and host there, and then everyone will be able to kind of review and check things out.
I actually have something to add. I totally forgot to mention two fairly important things. So the first thing is that Prism v2 was written in Go, and I love Go, but some of the OpenAPI libraries in Go aren't so great. And a lot of the rest of things at Stoplight were written in JavaScript, in TypeScript specifically. So Prism, most of the reason, 95% of the reason there was such a big gap between Prism v2 and v3 was that it was a total rewrite, like from scratch rewrite, and we've rewritten it in TypeScript. And so there's a lot of similar, it feels very similar to Go, but it has been much easier to work with because there's just a lot better tooling out there in the JavaScript community for things like JSON ref parsing and OpenAPI tools. So if anybody is interested in playing around, maybe adding some features, there's a whole bunch of issues. Like all of our upcoming features are listed as issues. And if you want to swing by and just say like, hey, I want to work on this, then awesome. They're all up on GitHub. We can talk. Another cool benefit of switching from Go to TypeScript is that it was, I can't remember the exact numbers, but like 300 times faster. Go is capable of being super quick, and it's not a harsh indictment of Go, but the previous version was quite slow. I think it was some of the OpenAPI tooling just couldn't really handle more than a few requests a second for some reason. But the TypeScript one is super quick. So it's open source. You can play with it. It's JavaScript or TypeScript. If you need help with TypeScript, then it's okay. Swing by and chat. And yeah, it's fast now. So those were the two announcements I had.
Awesome. And then Suvik also asked the SaaS version. So I think we can kind of iterate this. So this would be to kind of reiterate in terms of UI and everything, that in future versions of Stoplights, this will be baked in as part of Stoplight, and it will also be part of that kind of SaaS subscription model as well. So to kind of check out pricing for those and everything, you can hop on the Stoplight page and look at our pricing, and that will give you an idea kind of where things will be basically, just keeping in mind that we will have new versions coming out very soon with all of this baked in. Any other questions from anybody at this time? Great. And Suvik, I'll reach out to you on the side as well, and we can catch up a little bit more kind of about needs and everything like that, and we can have a quick conversation as well. I think other than that, that pretty much covers everything on the topic of Prism today. Once again, if there's any other questions, everybody has my email. Feel free to reach out, say hi. Otherwise, we'll catch up again soon. We'll be planning another webinar in the near future, and we'll announce the topic shortly. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Phil, thank you very much for your time, and we'll all catch up again soon.
Cheers. Bye.
All right. Bye, everybody.